So, have you ever wondered who controls the global financial system from behind the scenes? It's not BlackRock and it's not these major banks, okay? The truth is there's an entity that pulls the strings from behind the scenes and controls all global monetary policy, and they're actually dictating the direction of the entire financial system and the world economy. So, who is it? Well, there's a real institution that holds that kind of power. And I just wanted to put the truth out there so that people understand, because there's a misconception around it. Most people know about the Federal Reserve, which is the US central bank. They know about the European Central Bank, and perhaps even the International Monetary Fund, which is the IMF. But behind all of them, there's an institution that actually sits above all of those entities. And it's not in Washington, D.C. It's not the politicians, left or right. And it's actually not Wall Street, okay? It operates from a circular tower in Basel, Switzerland, where the world's most powerful central bankers meet behind closed doors about 6 times a year. And it's actually called the Bank for International Settlements, also known as the BIS. So, what do we know about the BIS? Well, they're actually considered the central bank of the central banks because they sit above all other central banks and major financial institutions. And while most people have never heard of them, it's arguably the most powerful financial institution in the world with the most authority, and it's untouchable. So that title isn't symbolic, it's quite literal. The international banking cartel that oversees the world's central banks actually operates under the frameworks and the rules that are set specifically by this single financial institution, which is the BIS, Bank for International Settlements. So, here at this place is where the world's most powerful central bankers follow formal bi-monthly meetings, and they wine and dine in private banquet rooms on the top floors with panoramic views of the mountains of Basel and the Alps. And these dinners aren't for small talk. They're not talking about sports, they're not just getting to know each other. They're part of the BIS's discreet diplomacy. And this is something they do at least 6 times a year bi-monthly. So, decisions made in these rooms, people need to understand, are far from the press and the public scrutiny. They're literally in the shadows. And their decisions have actually shaped global monetary policy for decades. And this is nothing new. It's been hidden in plain sight. No cameras, no press, no votes, and you won't hear politicians ever mention the BIS at all. And the BIS keeps an intentionally low profile. So rarely in the headlines, and rarely do they ever face public questioning or scrutiny because they're operating in the shadows. Yet, it remains the most powerful and influential central bank in the world that sits above all other financial institutions, literally calling the shots. Let's go back to how the BIS, Bank for International Settlements, actually became the most powerful financial institution that many have never even heard of before. Now, I know history can be boring at times, but this is going to blow your mind, so pay attention. The BIS controls global monetary coordination from behind the scenes. Now, we've established that already, and I'll get to how they got to that position. Yet, its decisions, even though it's operating from behind the scenes, their decisions ripple through every single economy globally, affecting billions of lives every single day and directly impacting how people live and their quality of life. So, when the world faced financial collapse in 2008, many people don't know this, but it wasn't politicians or Wall Street that actually crafted the rescue plan to bail out the big banks in 2008 during the great financial crisis. It was actually central bankers that were meeting behind closed doors at the BIS in Basel, Switzerland, in that beautiful circular tower. Okay? And that is where the details of the global bailout were actually refined and dialed down to a T. The idea came from there, and they rolled it out. Now, the BIS operates above national politics. You need to understand this. They're protected by extraordinary legal immunity and shielded by secrecy. Everything is within a closed loop and nothing gets out. It's closed door meetings and sealed archives allow the central bankers there to basically make decisions that 100% reshape the entire global economy and financial system, all without any public oversight or any political interference from politicians or from regular people like you and I. So they are literally operating behind the shadows and controlling the entire monetary system. And a little history about them, which is important, is the Bank for International Settlements was actually established in 1930, specifically to help manage Germany's World War I reparations, because they had to pay France and Belgium and the other nations. But after those payments stopped, just 2 years later in 1932, instead of the BIS dissolving and being abolished, which it should have been, the institution, the BIS, basically transformed and stayed alive when they shouldn't have. Okay? So what began as a simple clearinghouse basically became the discrete meeting ground for the world's most powerful central bankers that operate behind the scenes and meet there at least 6 times a year. Okay? So a place that's basically beyond the reach of governments and public scrutiny. So what's interesting is even during World War II, when Allied and Axis nations basically were at war, the central bankers, they still gathered and met in Basel, Switzerland. Okay? The BIS was never just a bank. And I believe this was by default and by design to still exist even after its initial task should have been removed. It was an early blueprint for global financial governance, okay? A kind of central nervous system for the entire world economy that was basically designed to outlast wars, governments, and political cycles. And they've managed to do that so far, and they're only evolving, writing the script for the new financial system, which is based on blockchain technology. So supposedly, that's when the BIS found its real purpose, around the 1930s, supposedly. And I don't believe that. I think they were meant to be here even afterwards. So the permanent link between the world's monetary masters that are behind the scenes and a global command center for monetary policy is basically in Switzerland. It's the BIS. And I think that was always the plan from day one, even though they want the public to believe that they only were there to manage German reparations. Now today, the Bank for International Settlements actually sits at the top of a network above 63 central banks that are its members, including the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, and the Bank of England, and the People's Bank of China as well. Those 63 members, plus the ones I just mentioned, actually sit under the BIS, and the BIS is on top. And these central banks are actually members of the BIS. So they play a critical role, but they take orders from the BIS. And the Federal Reserve, Bank of New York as well, also actually own shares in the BIS, which is really crazy to think about. In reality, your local bank answers to the country's central bank. That's the structure. And your country's central bank, like the 63 member central banks, answer to the BIS, which is above them. It's at the top of the pyramid.